There is a specific moment, and if you are watching this, you have likely already felt it, when the exhaustion of pretending to be someone you are not becomes more unbearable than the fear of finally becoming who you are. You have been carrying a version of yourself that no longer fits. A constructed identity assembled from other people's expectations, old survival strategies, and the relentless pressure to appear as though you have it together. And somewhere beneath all of that performance, something ancient and patient and entirely real has been waiting for you to stop. To simply stop and listen. Here is the truth no one tells you about the moment your life finally begins to work. It does not arrive with a fanfare. It does not announce itself with sudden confidence or a miracle descending from nowhere. It arrives in the quiet. It arrives when you are sitting alone, exhausted from a version of yourself you have been carrying for years, and something inside you simply lets go. Not with drama, not with ceremony, just a release, a soft, irreversible surrender to who you were always meant to become. Most people are waiting for the external world to change first. They are waiting for the right opportunity, the right partner, the right financial moment before they allow themselves to truly begin. What they do not realize is that the external world is not the architect of their reality. They are. And the moment they understand this, not intellectually, not as a concept heard in passing, but as a living truth felt in the marrow of their bones, that is the precise moment the chapter where everything goes right silently opens its door. Carl Jung spent a lifetime mapping the territories of the human soul, not because he sought easy answers, but because he believed the unexamined life was the root cause of every form of suffering a human being could experience. He observed that before a person discovers who they truly are, the identity they have been holding on to often begins to collapse. The ego names this collapse failure. It catastrophizes. It panics. It reaches for every available distraction to avoid sitting with the discomfort of becoming. But the deeper self, that vast, ancient, intelligent part of you existing beneath the noise of daily thought, calls this collapse preparation. It is not punishment. It is architecture. The universe is not tearing your life apart. It is clearing the construction site so that something permanent can finally be built. That is why so many people abandon the journey just before the breakthrough. They mistake the labor pains of transformation for evidence that transformation is not coming. They quit in the middle of the chapter designed to make them extraordinary, convinced they are not meant for anything greater. But you are still here, and that means something. The chapter where your life finally aligns rarely originates from a miracle descending from outside. It begins with a shift occurring on the inside. You stop chasing approval from people who were never going to give it freely. You stop forcing doors that were never meant to open for the version of you that was knocking. You begin to trust your own path, even when visibility is low, even when the destination cannot yet be seen. And then, almost imperceptibly, something begins to shift externally. New doors appear where walls once stood. The right people arrive at precisely the right moment. Ideas surface not from strained effort, but from quiet clarity. Looking back, you begin to understand with certainty that the delays were never punishments. They were calibrations. The universe fine-tuning you for a life you were not yet ready to receive. So before you surrender this season, before you close the book on a chapter you have not yet finished reading, ask yourself one question. What if nothing has been falling apart? What if everything has been falling precisely into place? Because if Jung was right, your greatest chapter does not begin when the world finally changes. It begins the moment you do. To fully enter the chapter where it all goes right, we must first dismantle the modern myth of luck. Our current culture insists that achievement is a mechanical consequence of effort. Work harder, get more. Push longer, go further. But Carl Jung looked at the full fabric of a human life and saw something far more profound beneath the surface. He observed that when a life finally begins to align, it is not because the person started working harder, it is because they entered a state of numinosity. The word numinous, borrowed from the theologian Rudolf Otto, describes an encounter that is what Otto called a mysterium tremendum et fascinans, a mystery simultaneously terrifying and magnetic. In the architecture of your inner world, the numinous marks the precise moment when your internal structure becomes so integrated that it begins to shape the external world to match its new form. When you sense that you are finally in the chapter where things are going right, what you are actually experiencing is a numinous encounter with possibility. For years, you may have felt as though you were calling into an empty void, pushing against a reality that refused to yield. You planned, you pivoted, you exhausted yourself forcing pathways open, only to find them sealed. This is the hallmark of the ego in its desperate struggle. The ego is that small, conscious, anxious part of you that believes it can dictate terms to existence. But the right chapter only opens when the ego finally relinquishes its frantic grip on control and becomes a student of something far deeper, what Jung called the self. The self, in Jungian terms, is the totality of your being, the blueprint of who you were shaped to become before the world layered its expectations onto you. When the self takes the lead, the nature of opportunity undergoes complete transformation. It moves from something you relentlessly pursue into something you naturally inhabit. In this state of numinosity, your life begins to operate through a psychological magnetism. Jung observed that as an individual moves through individuation, the act of illuminating the dark corners of the soul, the surrounding environment begins responding with a precision that feels almost impossible to explain rationally. This is not magic, it is resonance. As if the universe has been patiently waiting for you to reach a specific level of internal honesty before revealing the path that was in plain sight all along. You recognize numinous moments by the psychological weight they carry. An ordinary opportunity feels like a decision you make. A numinous opportunity feels like a calling that makes you. It carries an authority that bypasses your analytical mind entirely. There is a strange, quiet certainty that settles deep in your chest, replacing the restless noise of previous chapters with something resembling peace. This is the unmistakable signal that your conscious intentions have finally harmonized with the wisdom of your unconscious depth. The complexity of this transition lies in a difficult truth. The numinous is often accompanied by a sense of dread. Jung noted that many individuals flee from their greatest breakthroughs because the radiance of the self is simply too bright for the ego's comfortable darkness. When everything begins to go right, it demands you release the familiar comfort of your limitations. You can no longer point to your past or circumstances as explanation, because the numinous opportunity has quietly dismantled every excuse you relied upon. To step through this particular door, you must be willing to die to the smaller, older version of yourself. You must accept that the provisional life, that suspended state of waiting for your real life to begin, is over. Most people spend entire decades in the waiting room of their own existence, convinced they are merely preparing. But the numinous encounter is not an invitation to prepare more thoroughly. It is a summons into radical presence. This phase is defined by a fundamental shift from action to alignment. In previous chapters, your focus was fixed on what you could do. In this chapter, the focus moves to who you are being. Jung believed that when a human being lives in internal conflict, they project that conflict outward, manufacturing friction that appears external but is, in truth, a reflection of an internal war. When that internal war reaches its conclusion, the friction of the external world dissolves. People who once blocked your path quietly move aside. Doors that were sealed fly open without force. This is not the world changing its position on you. This is you having ceased to vibrate at the frequency of struggle. You are now standing in the light of the numinous. Rightness is not a destination you reach. It is a psychological posture you inhabit. When you finally align with the self, the world has no choice but to answer. If the first step into this chapter is recognizing the numinous door, the second step is understanding the internal architecture of why you were previously unable to walk through it. Carl Jung's most revolutionary contribution was his discovery that we are not the singular, unified masters of our own inner households. We prefer to believe we are rational beings, making linear, conscious choices. But Jung observed that much of our behavior is quietly orchestrated by what he called complexes, autonomous collections of memories, emotions, and images clustered around a core wound or theme. A power complex, an inferiority complex, an abandonment complex. These are the invisible architects designing the previous chapters of your story, acting as the primary source of interference between you and the life you were built to lead. When you find yourself in a chapter where everything goes wrong, it is rarely because the universe has turned against you. It is almost always because a complex has silently taken the wheel. You believe you are making a strategic professional decision, but you are responding to a decades-old terror of being seen as inadequate. You believe you are choosing a relationship based on genuine love, but you are seeking resolution to an ancient wound of childhood abandonment. These complexes function like gravitational fields, pulling every event and every opportunity into their own orbit before your conscious mind can weigh in. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will govern your life and you will call it fate. For most of your journey, what you labeled as bad luck or poor timing was simply the interference of a complex you had not yet identified. But in the chapter where it all goes right, something profound occurs: the dissolution. Not the total eradication of the complex, for Jung understood that complexes are woven into the fabric of the human psyche. It is rather the removal of the complex's effective charge. Its grip loosens. You begin to enter a state of psychological transparency. When a numinous opportunity surfaces, you no longer perceive it through the warped lens of your past wounds. The static clears. You discover you can hear the world's invitations with remarkable clarity, because you are no longer drowned out by the internal screaming of your own unresolved ghosts. This dissolution occurs when you have engaged in enough shadow work to recognize a complex the moment it attempts to seize control. You notice the trigger. You feel the familiar heat of the old emotion rising. And for the very first time, you possess the consciousness to choose not to act from that place. This shift fundamentally alters the frequency of your entire life. When complexes are highly charged, they function like a psychological repellent to high-level opportunity. Success, in every form, is drawn toward stability, clarity, and presence. It is instinctively repelled by the frantic energy radiating from an unresolved complex. As these interferences dissolve, the enormous psychic energy previously consumed managing internal triggers and fighting invisible battles is redirected into your creative output, your relationships, and your professional presence. You realize with sharp clarity that you were never lacking in talent. You were never lacking in intelligence. You were never lacking in the resources required to move forward. You were simply overloaded with psychological drag. If this realization is landing somewhere deep within you, if you feel the weight of invisible chains beginning to loosen, drop 1111, I release what no longer belongs to me, in the comments right now. Let that declaration exist somewhere outside your own mind, because the moment you name what you are releasing, you accelerate the release itself. In this new chapter, you move with a fluid and effortless quality. You respond to the present moment as it genuinely is, rather than as your past conditioned you to expect. This is the alchemy of the breakthrough. When the noise of the complex finally quiets, the authentic music of your life can be heard for the first time. You have transitioned from constant defensive reaction to sovereign response. In that silence, where the complex used to scream, the world finally begins to go right. To genuinely grasp how a life moves from friction to alignment, we must step beyond the narrow confines of linear cause and effect. Our modern world is built on mechanical causality, the belief that every outcome is the direct result of a specific action. We treat the universe as a giant machine that must be cranked by hand. But Carl Jung observed a phenomenon that defied this entire worldview, something he named synchronicity, or the acausal connecting principle. An acausal event is a moment in which two or more things occur simultaneously without any direct physical link, yet they are united by a meaning so profound it changes the direction of a life. For much of our lives, we are consumed by the how. We pour mental energy into tracing lines of causality, anxiously monitoring every link in the chain of our ambitions. We tell ourselves that if we cannot see the path from where we are to where we want to be, the path does not exist. But Jung recognized that when an individual reaches sufficient depth of psychological integration, the chain itself becomes secondary to the meaning of the moment. In this state of acausal flow, the boundary between your internal world and external reality begins to dissolve. Jung believed that at a foundational level, mind and matter are not separate entities. They are two expressions of the same underlying reality, what he called the unus mundus, the one world. When you end the internal war between your conscious desires and your unconscious truths, the external world reflects this peace with startling precision. You might be contemplating a difficult professional shift, and that same afternoon a stranger mentions the exact resource you had been silently searching for. Or you wake from a dream holding a specific symbol, only to encounter it repeated 3 times in the physical world before nightfall. These are not accidents. These are the environment echoing your internal state back to you. To the purely rational mind, these are mere coincidences. To the Jungian, these are meaningful coincidences. The universe's way of signaling that you are no longer an isolated ego fighting against a hostile environment. This shift demands a radical departure from the grind mentality that defines modern achievement culture. In a world governed solely by causality, you believe you must build the bridge to your future brick by brick through sheer willpower. In a world that includes synchronicity, you begin to understand that while you are laying bricks on your side, the bridge is also growing toward you from the other side. There is a cosmic cooperation at play that logic alone cannot account for. The work in this stage is no longer about raw force. It is about noticing. It requires a refined eye for symbol and a high degree of psychological alertness. Most people miss their most significant breakthroughs because they are searching exclusively for logical causes, waiting for a formal invitation, a clear linear sign that fits neatly within their pre-existing plans. But the breakthrough frequently arrives acausally. It comes from an unexpected angle, through a chance encounter or a seemingly random occurrence the ego nearly dismisses as irrelevant noise. When you enter the acausal flow state, you cease trying to force outcomes and begin allowing them to manifest through your state of being. Your actions become effortless because they are no longer an attempt to impose your will on a resistant world. They are a response to a world already moving in your direction. You shift from being a laborer inside the machine to being a participant in a symphony. In this space, the seemingly impossible becomes inevitable, and the distance between a thought and its realization begins to collapse. In the traditional Jungian map of the psyche, the mana personality represents a pivotal and frequently misunderstood stage of deep integration. The word mana originates in Melanesian culture, describing a supernatural quality of extraordinary power residing within certain people or places. When you enter this chapter of your evolution, you have tapped into an internal wellspring of archetypal energy that radiates outward, affecting the environment around you in ways that are difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. You have moved beyond the exhausting pursuit of recognition and stepped into a state of being in which you carry a quiet, unshakable authority that alters the chemistry of every room you enter. To understand the mana personality, you must first understand what occurs when the ego finally makes peace with the deeper forces of the unconscious. For most of your life, your power was likely conditional, dependent on position, income, or the fluctuating approval of others. This is external power, and it is inherently fragile, existing at the mercy of circumstances you cannot fully control. However, as you successfully navigate the confrontation with your shadow and integrate the anima or animus, a substantial reservoir of psychic energy is liberated from internal conflict and repression. This liberated energy now flows freely through your personality. This is the birth of the mana personality, the individual who carries the great force because they are no longer internally divided against themselves. When you embody this state, people encounter you with a mixture of respect and quiet awe. Not because you are performing authority or projecting power. The mana personality is often remarkably composed. It is because you have become genuinely whole in a world populated almost entirely by fragments. Most people are scattered and perpetually at war with their own concealed impulses. When they encounter someone who is integrated, someone who has descended into the depths of their own soul and returned carrying gold, they instinctively sense a sovereignty they themselves have not yet accessed. In this chapter, the world begins to say yes to you before you have fully articulated the ask. Opportunities gravitate toward you, not because you are relentlessly pursuing them, but because your presence creates a gravitational field of authority that draws the world to meet it. However, Jung issued a firm warning regarding this stage. The mana personality is a position of great danger for the unprepared ego. There is a profound temptation to believe this new power belongs to me, that the ego has ascended to something divine. Jung called this inflation. The authentic mana personality understands with deep clarity that they are not the origin of this power. They are the channel through which it flows. The authority they carry belongs to the self, the totality of the psyche, and not to the small conscious ego that likes to take credit for outcomes. This humility is precisely what makes the authority so potent and enduring. When you stop attempting to possess the power, you become nearly invincible, because there is no ego vanity left for the world to diminish. If something in this is resonating in a place you cannot quite name, write 777. I am the power moving through me, not the power itself, in the comments right now. That is not a small acknowledgement. That is a declaration of alignment. And alignment, as Jung understood, is what changes everything. In this stage of your life, your external reality begins to accurately mirror this internal sovereignty. The constant need to prove yourself, to argue your case, or to fight for a seat at the table, this evaporates. You no longer require force to receive what is rightfully aligned with your path, because you are now operating through influence rather than pressure. Your words carry a different weight. Your path becomes remarkably, almost mysteriously clear. You have claimed the mana because you have genuinely earned it, through the demanding, unglamorous, often lonely work of individuation. And as a result, the external world has no choice but to acknowledge what you carry. This is the chapter where you cease being a casualty of circumstance and begin functioning as the conscious architect of your own reality. In the pursuit of transformation, we frequently find ourselves caught in the exhausting geometry of the either/or. We become convinced we must choose between security and passion, between assertiveness and compassion, between our obligations to others and our loyalty to ourselves. This state of being torn is what Jung identified as the fundamental tension of opposites. Most people attempt to resolve it through rational analysis, weighing considerations until they settle for a compromise that leaves both sides of their nature feeling betrayed. Jung introduced a radical alternative. He called it the transcendent function, the psychological alchemy that reveals what he described as the third way. The third way is a path that linear logic is structurally incapable of perceiving. Logic operates only within the boundaries of what is already known. It can rearrange the furniture of your existing reality, but it cannot build a new room. When you are confronted with a profound life dilemma, where both available options feel like forms of loss, logic has reached the outer edge of its usefulness. This is when the transcendent function begins its work beneath the surface of conscious awareness. Rather than rushing toward a premature resolution to escape the discomfort of uncertainty, the individual who has come to understand this alchemy learns to hold the tension. To hold the tension is to remain in the center of the conflict, without flinching, without forcing a conclusion, without picking a side simply to relieve internal pressure. This is perhaps the most demanding task in the entire Jungian journey. The ego is constitutionally allergic to uncertainty. It craves a plan, a resolution, forward movement. But Jung observed that if the ego can remain still long enough in that uncomfortable middle space, the unconscious will eventually deliver a new and unexpected third possibility. This is not a compromise between existing options. It is a total breakthrough to a higher plane of perception. A bridge materializes where there was previously only a chasm. This third way incorporates the essential truths of both opposing sides, but elevates them to a broader level of consciousness. The friction of the dilemma dissolves because the new path does not require you to sacrifice a dimension of yourself to move forward. The activation of this function demands a radical shift in how you relate to waiting. In our high-speed world, waiting is interpreted as failure. In the alchemy of the third way, however, waiting is an active, creative process, a state of heightened psychological alertness in which you provide a container for the unconscious to complete what conscious effort alone cannot. This is the stage where dreams, meaningful coincidences, and sudden flashes of unexpected clarity become your primary guides. You are waiting for what Jung called the inner click, the unmistakable sensation of rightness signaling the path has opened. When you master the art of the third way, you cease living in internal civil conflict. Your contradictions are not flaws to be corrected, but raw materials for your next evolution. You have stopped choosing between two paths. You have become the path itself. In the psychology of Carl Jung, one of the most formidable hidden barriers to fulfillment is not an external obstacle, but an internal leak known as projection. Every person carries a shadow, that dimension of personality containing traits, impulses, and potentials deemed unacceptable or not us. Because we cannot consciously bear to witness these qualities within ourselves, the psyche projects them outward onto the people around us. We see our suppressed arrogance mirrored in a difficult authority figure. We see our unacknowledged ambition reflected in a competitor we quietly resent. We see our own untapped power embodied in someone we have unconsciously designated as an adversary. When you are living in active projection, you are effectively donating your psychic energy to other people. If your days are consumed by preoccupation with what a competitor is doing, or if you find yourself drained by the perceived injustice of someone else's success, you are caught in a shadow projection. You are providing that person with prime real estate inside your mind, fueling their momentum with your own psychic gasoline. Jung observed that everything which irritates us about others can lead us toward an understanding of ourselves. To withdraw a projection is to look clearly at the person who provokes your strongest reactions and ask with genuine honesty, what part of this belongs to me? If you carry contempt towards someone for their boldness, you may discover that you have long suppressed your own voice. By reclaiming that energy, you are no longer a well-intentioned person being held back by difficult people. You become a whole person with the capacity to claim what is authentically yours. This reclamation produces an immediate influx of vitality. Many creators and leaders experience profound burnout, not because they lack ability, but because their energy is dispersed across dozens of people they are judging or envying. When you draw those threads back into yourself, you experience a surge of aliveness that genuinely feels like a second beginning. In this stage, you also reclaim what Jung called the golden shadow. Not all projections carry a negative charge. We also project our highest unrealized potential onto people we most admire, convincing ourselves that greatness belongs to them and is simply unavailable to us. By withdrawing these positive projections, you cease being an audience member in someone else's story and begin inhabiting the center of your own. The brilliance you saw reflected in another was always, in part, your own light being shown back to you. By sealing these psychic leaks, you finally operate from a full reservoir. The path is clear. The fuel is replenished. Your vision is finally prepared to take genuine flight. In the concluding reaches of Jung's work, he moved beyond conventional psychology into the territory of the unus mundus, the one world. This concept holds that at the most fundamental level, the division between mind and matter, between your internal thought life and the external physical reality you inhabit, is ultimately an illusion. Jung believed there to be a singular, underlying unity threading through all of existence. When you enter the chapter where everything goes right, it is because you have reached a quality of consciousness that places you in genuine alignment with this unus mundus. In this state, the boundary between what you think and what you experience begins to dissolve, and manifestation is no longer a struggle. It is simply a natural consequence of your existence. Throughout earlier phases of your journey, you likely experienced the world as something outside of you, a terrain populated by obstacles, people requiring convincing, goals requiring relentless pursuit. This is the experience of the divided psyche. But as you integrate your shadow, claim your mana, and move through the transcendent function, synchronicity moves from being a rare, remarkable exception to being the very fabric of your daily experience. Living within the unus mundus means your internal frequency has become so clear and potent that it functions as a direct architect of your external reality. When you hold a clear, integrated thought about a new direction or a needed resource, the physical world begins to respond with startling swiftness. You think of a specific collaborator, and they contact you that afternoon. You recognize a gap in your understanding, and the exact book or mentor arrives in your path seemingly without effort. This is not supernatural intervention. It is the entirely natural consequence of living as a whole being within a unified universe. When you are no longer at war with yourself on the inside, the external world ceases to wage war against you on the outside. This state demands a profound shift in how you understand your own thinking. In the unus mundus, your thoughts are not merely private internal events. They are creative acts with genuine reach into the fabric of reality. Jung observed that for individuation to reach completion, a person must understand their responsibility not only for their actions, but for the quality of their consciousness. If you are harboring concealed resentments or unintegrated shadow material, the unus mundus will faithfully mirror those back as obstacles and apparent misfortune. When you have done genuine inner work to become clear, the mirror of reality becomes equally clear in return. Most people spend their lives attempting to rearrange the external world through sheer force, pushing, pulling, grinding. But the person living in alignment with the unus mundus understands that when you move the internal center, the external world reorganizes itself accordingly. This is the quiet secret behind those individuals whose lives appear charmed from the outside. They are not luckier than you, they are simply more integrated. They have arrived at the place where the ego has become a humble instrument of the self, and the self is an expression of the one world. The experience carries a profound sense of ease and genuine belonging, perhaps for the first time. You recognize that the external world is not a machine to be fought, but a living, responsive extension of your own deepest nature. The anxiety of the seeker quiets. You can finally relax into the current of your own existence, knowing that the same intelligence governing your heartbeat also governs the stars overhead and the opportunities appearing in your path. If you have found Carl Jung philosophy, and this work has found a home in something real within you, if you sense that someone in your life stands exactly at this threshold, share this with them, not as a recommendation, as a genuine act of care. Because the soul that is ready for this will know it the moment they hear it, and your act of sharing might be the precise synchronicity that changes the direction of their entire chapter. This is what the Unus Mundus looks like in practice. Not a mystical abstraction reserved for philosophers and scholars, but a living, breathing reality available to any human being willing to do the inner work to earn it. You reach out to someone. They watch a video. Something shifts. A life changes direction. And what appeared to be a simple act of sharing turns out to have been the exact intervention that the universe required. That is the one world in motion. That is synchronicity wearing the ordinary clothes of everyday life. The culmination of the Jungian journey is not discovered in a financial milestone, a professional title, or any specific external achievement, though these things frequently emerge as natural byproducts. The final arrival is the state of conscious individuation. Throughout this exploration, we have examined the weight of the soul's most essential labor, confronting the shadow, dissolving the complexes, and claiming the manna. We have traced how the chapter where everything goes right is initiated by internal shifts rather than external circumstances. But here, in this concluding passage, we encounter the deepest truth this entire map points toward. This chapter is not about acquiring anything. It is about the profound and irreversible act of becoming. It is the moment when the mask you constructed to survive the world finally slips from your face, and the soul you were born carrying finally steps forward and takes the lead. Individuation is the process by which a human being becomes a psychological individual, a separate, indivisible, unified whole. In earlier life, most of us are what Jung called collective beings, an accumulation of societal conditioning, parental expectations, and professional roles adopted to earn a place in the world. We are fragments of a personality reaching toward integration, pressured to conform to a world that rewards sameness. The final arrival occurs when you cease attempting to fit into a world that was not designed for you, and begin the deeper work of standing fully as who you are. This is not the ego's desire to distinguish itself above others. It is the soul's irreducible necessity to exist as itself. The realization that your particularity is not a deficiency to be corrected, but a mission to be fulfilled. When you reach this state of conscious individuation, your external life finally closes the gap with your internal reality. For years, perhaps for decades, there existed a painful distance between who you sensed yourself to be on the inside and how you were actually living on the outside. This gap was the source of your anxiety, your persistent sense of obstruction, and your recurring feeling that life was happening to everyone else while you watched. It was as though you were a master musician attempting to play a symphony on an instrument that had never been properly tuned. Individuation is the process of tuning the instrument. Once the instrument, your psyche, is whole and resonant, the music of your life naturally becomes what it was always capable of being. The right opportunities begin appearing because you have finally become the right person to receive them. In this stage, the very concept of destiny is redefined. To the unintegrated person, destiny feels like something that arrives from outside, often arbitrary, often cruel. To the individuated person, destiny is the external expression of internal character. As you become more conscious, you recognize that you are no longer subject to fate in the way you once were. You are a co-creator of your reality. You find that you carry a vocation, a calling that is uniquely yours, that no other person on earth can fulfill in quite the way you can. When you follow this calling, the universe organizes itself in your favor, not because the world has changed its nature, but because you have finally ceased resisting your own. You are no longer swimming against the current of your soul. You have become the current. The final arrival is also marked by a quality of objective clarity. Because you have integrated your shadow and moved beyond the binary limitations of the ego, you possess a perceptual depth that others frequently lack. You are no longer triggered by the world. You are genuinely interested in it. You observe the archetypal patterns unfolding in culture, in organizations, in your closest relationships. And this perspective provides an extraordinary navigational advantage. You make decisions not from fear or appetite, but from the long-term requirements of your soul's deepest purpose. Crucially, conscious individuation brings with it the final dissolution of the need for external validation. In earlier chapters, you wanted things to go right so that the world would confirm your worth. In this final chapter, you know your worth because you have encountered the self directly. You no longer need the world to say yes to you, because you have already said yes to yourself, fully, without reservation, without condition. And it is precisely this absence of neediness that makes the world so eager to meet you where you are. You have become psychologically whole, grounded, sovereign, complete. This is the ultimate arrival, not the end of the journey. The soul's work does not conclude here, but it is the end of the struggle. You have moved from the labor of becoming into the ease of being. You stand at the center of your own life, and the external world reorganizes itself around the clarity of your internal integration. You have become who you were always meant to be, and in that becoming, you discover that the chapter where everything goes right is not a temporary window of favorable circumstance. It is not a lucky season that will eventually turn. It is your new, permanent address. You are no longer searching for the gold. You have become the alchemist. And everything you touch now holds within it the potential to be transformed. Think about where you were when you first started asking the questions that brought you here. Think about the version of you that was convinced the problem was external, the wrong circumstances, the wrong timing, the wrong people surrounding you. That version of you was not wrong to be in pain. That version of you was not broken. That version of you was simply not yet ready for what you are now standing at the edge of. The soul does not rush. It never has. It waits with the patience of something that understands eternity. And when you finally arrive, when you finally stop running from yourself and turn toward the full truth of who you are, it does not celebrate with noise. It simply exhales, as if to say, "There you are. I have been here the whole time." The soul has arrived, and the world, as it always does when met with true wholeness, has no choice but to follow. If this journey through Carl Jung's map of the soul spoke to something real within you, if any part of this felt less like new information and more like something you had always known but needed to hear spoken aloud, then like this video and subscribe to Carl Jung Philosophy. We exist to provide you with the maps needed to navigate the most essential territory any human being can explore, the depths of your own soul. Which of these stages are you currently moving through? Are you in the confrontation with your shadow, or are you beginning to sense the first quiet tremors of the unus mundus? Leave the number of the stage that feels most alive for you right now in the comments below. Let us hold this space together. The journey is long, but the destination, as you have now seen, is nothing less than the full and irreversible reclamation of your life.